Well, thanks everyone, and glad to be here with you all. Today's session is on values-based decision making. And so, as we get started, you may have come to this session thinking to yourself, I live by a strong set of values already. And if that's you, then I'm glad you're here because you're going to enjoy thinking just a little bit deeply, and maybe a little bit differently than you have before about your values. Perhaps you've done even a values exercise before. This is a workshop, so it's not just a sitting and listening session. It is active participation. We're going to have an activity for you guys to do where you'll choose your values and a resource that we'll share later in the chat. And then we'll walk through a series of questions as we go. It would be helpful if you don't already have a pen and some paper, a journal. That will be what you need to make the most out of this session as we get started here. And of course, it's lunch, so please enjoy that as well. We're going to run your values today that you select through a series of tests. And for instance, like let's say you value challenge and you also are a person that maybe also values health. Well, how often are you choosing the hardest class at the gym? Or if you value responsibility and community, are you picking up trash when you walk through your neighborhood? We'll ask ourselves some questions. You'll choose those questions really, but we'll provide some as well to help you think deeply about how you're living out those values and what they look like to actually implement in your decision making. That's what we have on the docket here today. Before we get started any further, I'll be happy to just share a little bit about myself. I actually went to A&M and graduated from the business school in 2014 and went to UT for grad school and then have been back here ever since. I've married to a guy that I met in the introductory finance class here at A&M, and we have two toddler boys. I've been doing this work we're doing here today, helping people think about who they are, how they work with other people for about a decade now, facilitating retreats and coaching leaders. And this particular session on naming your values is a session that I've run with countless students, executives, and teams over the years. Mostly in the nonprofit sector, and for better or for worse, A&M is still a nonprofit, right? My own personal values are care, community, and curiosity. For a reference point there, since of course leading this session, I also have some values, right? With that, let's dive in. Many of you have probably read or at least seen Alice in Wonderland. And there's this great quote in the movie, in the book, that really exemplifies what the purpose of identifying your values is. One day, Alice comes to a fork in the road, and she sees a Cheshire cat in a tree. And she asks, which road should I take? And the cat says, where do you want to go? I don't know, Alice answered. Then, said the cat, it doesn't matter. This really exemplifies the starting place that we begin today when talking about values. And the reason is because there's this wonderful quote that exemplifies this really well in the book Originals by Adam Grant. And after studying values for more than 40 years, psychologist Shalom Schwartz found that their main purpose was to help people choose between conflicting options. And if you didn't know, you are making hundreds of decisions every single day. And so we want this exercise today not to be just a fun, deepening self-knowledge exercise. Of course, that's good too, but we actually want you to be able to apply it to some decision making. Maybe you've got a decision, a simple decision, like how to spend your holidays. For some of you, that's not even a simple one, right? Or some of the bigger life decisions. Wherever you fall on that spectrum, you want to be able to apply your values as a test you can use in helping you make a decision, essentially a marker in that decision making. And so perhaps, again, you have done a values exercise before, but we're going to try some different approaches to that exercise today, and you're going to leave here with some drafted personal values for you to continue to test in the days to come. If you can't tell already, I'm a big proponent of other people have said it better than me. I love this quote from the book Let Your Life Speak by Parker Palmer. Before I can listen to my life, before I tell my life what to do with it, I must listen to my life telling me who I am. Again, this values exercise is a good moment to stop and ask ourselves if we are listening to our life. I also appreciate this cutting quote from St. Teresa of Avila, a 16th century mystic. It is a shame and unfortunate that through our own fault, we don't understand ourselves or know who we are. Again, she's not messing around there and just saying the truth, right? Which is that there is always more we can learn about ourselves and each other, right? But if there's always more to learn about myself, what does that even look like? It looks like pausing, noticing, why is it that I think the way that I think? Why is it that I do this thing the way I do it? And then if we were going to give some names to some of those things, what might those be? And values can be one indicator. Okay, maybe I was really upset about this thing that happened at work yesterday because I felt like actually it kind of messed with my values. It wasn't really in line with my values, right? If you have names to those values, then you can articulate those things, not only to yourself, but even to someone else if need be, right? So then also we need to think about something else here as we get started. Hopefully you all know we are at a Living Well workshop. And so we want to think about where this conversation we're having today fits in a discussion about our well-being. And really, it fits in the spiritual dimension. We're going to look closely at your values. We're going to uncover part of your worldview. We're going to think about your beliefs a bit. And so, as you're doing that, really, we think broadly about spiritual. We hear spiritual and we think that that's religious, but really, we're thinking more broadly than that in this conversation. And of course, our values and worldview are in the end related to how we view those things, right? So that is really the part of our well-being we're focusing on in this part of you all's wellness affair. What we'll do is we'll look at your behaviors and actions. Those things will give us indicators about our values, which are always connected to our beliefs and ultimately our worldview. And we're about to walk into an exercise right here that will reveal a little bit about all of those things. And one thing to note as we walk into that is that it's possible you may discover today that things that you thought you valued, you don't anymore. Or perhaps they're just values you wish you had. We'll get there in a little bit, but just so you know, those are the hard questions that I'm hoping you all have the opportunity to think about today. Another thing that's helpful to think about as we get started and thinking about decision making is that our values should be spilling out. If we're truly living them out, they should be kind of spilling out all over the place, right? They should be showing us that we are living in our authentic self, whatever that looks like. I think of some examples of people that are doing this really well in my own sphere, my own world. One is one of my toddler boys goes to a preschool here in Bryan College Station. And the head of school there is a person that highly values nature and the dignity of creation. And if there is a bird's nest that takes residence in the merry-go-round and the playground, she will, and all the other teachers know too, that merry-go-round becomes out of commission until those birds fly that nest. No matter who you are, faculty, staff, of course, the kids, the students, but the parents and the larger community that are associated with that school, everyone there gets a sense just by walking around that the people that run this place are serious about their appreciation and the value that they put on nature, creation, and beauty. Another person that really exemplifies her values well was my grandma, who passed away earlier this year. I've spent a lot of time thinking about my grandma's values through the years, especially because she outlived her husband as well as all three of her children. And my cousin and I have seen, even before that all happened, her generosity and selflessness. But even in her last years of life, in her 90s, she was driving her nephew and other people 30 years or more younger than her to their hospital visits, doctor appointments. She was a person that lived out her faith through that generosity and selflessness at a level that again just becomes infectious not only to the people immediately around her that are closest to her, but also anyone that just sees her living that out from afar, even is affected by it. Perhaps as I was telling that story, you too had a moment to think about maybe somebody in your family from growing up or just a mentor in your life that does that level of living out their values. People like this who tend to live most courageously seem to find their personal values at some level infectious. So if we look at your life, coming back to you, and you're here in this session thinking about your values, if we look at your value or your life, what do we see that you value? What are other people catching from you? We're going to walk through first a couple reflections that will offer us a moment to stand back and take a glimpse, a snapshot of ourselves from a distance. So this is where you'll need your pen and paper. We're going to zoom in actually on Saturday. So this is 6 days ago. So you all may need a moment just to even remember what happened last Saturday. But when you remember what happened, first, just take a brief moment to note, what were you doing? Who are you with that day? And then going deeper, what did you say no to in order to be in that place or with those people? And then finally, if Saturday was a good one for you, not everyone here probably had an amazing Saturday, but let's start with if you had a great Saturday. What good decisions did you make earlier in the week to make Saturday a good one? And then for those, if it wasn't a great day, what decisions did you fail to make that might have contributed to it? And I'll give you a couple moments to write your notes down. We're going to use this work we're doing right here again later. Okay. So second reflection, there we really zoomed in and now we're going to really zoom out. This next one you'll need to draw just a 2-column chart. We're going to look at your beliefs. Think about the beliefs that you hold, the things that you believe most fervently. They could be things that you believe about why we're here on this earth, about the goodness in people or not, about work, about leadership, about why things happen the way they do, about anything in terms of your beliefs, high level. Pick just 2 or 3 of those and write them in on essentially the left-hand side of this column. And whatever these beliefs are that you came up with, they should be really quite specific, right? So it shouldn't just be like something like family is important. Like, talk about what you mean there. What is important about family? Okay. Next, Now, looking at each of those beliefs you just wrote down, how did you come to believe those things? How did those beliefs come to be? Okay, so as you're writing these down, again, there should be some deep thinking happening here. So you shouldn't just say, oh, somebody taught it to me. It should be, well, somebody might have taught it to you, but then how did you come to determine that that was a belief you should continue to hold? And you're welcome to go beyond three here, but just as a starting place, write at least two or three. Okay, so now when we ask ourselves, what's our worldview? What you've just written down is likely a big part of your worldview, or at least some part of it. Write down, as we finish this part of the exercise, write down somebody you'd love to share what you just wrote down with, somebody in your life that'd be good to share with or you would like to share with. I think it could be a good conversation. I will give you several things that you can do with the work that we're doing here today. And this was your first point in that homework set that you're getting, is you can have this conversation with somebody close to you about your beliefs and even ask them what theirs are. So the work that we just did, those two exercises, sets the backdrop for the values exercise we're about to complete in two stages. And I'll ask the Living Well staff if you want to drop that PowerPoint in the chat now for everybody to start downloading. That is a good time for that now. The PowerPoint you're about to see in the chat is going to have the values cards for you to use in determining what your values are. And in that value set, it will have a set of instructions. And I'll go ahead and walk those instructions, walk you through those now before you walk through this round. But in this exercise, you are going to simply look at all these different cards, quote, virtual cards in the PowerPoint deck, and determine what is the most important values you hold. And I will go ahead and tell you the end game here. You're eventually going to get this list down to three. Okay, so when we say most important values and we're looking at dozens of cards, okay, it's important for us to have some initial questions that will help us figure out and some tips to help you guys figure out whether something is truly a most important value for you. So if you look at a word, it may seem like something, okay, I like this thing, but is this thing the most important thing to me, right? Is it a thing that other people are catching from me, to a reference of what we said earlier, right? Well, first, it's helpful not to linger long on a card. When you look at a card, go with your gut. Even if it's something nice to have and it is a value that you would like to have, it doesn't make it the most important, okay? And so I think this is the biggest thing for everybody to know going into the exercise. And focus more on the value word or concept. Every card will have your definition on it, and you'll be able to, of course, look at that definition if you need as a reference point, but you don't necessarily need to be like, okay, well, this isn't my value because I don't agree with this definition. The definition's only there if you need it. Okay, so let me, just because, I'm going to say one more thing and then I'll drop the PowerPoint in the chat, Madeline. And then lastly, if you're wrestling with whether it's a value or not, simply think of whether you have lived this value out in the past 2 days. And the instructions I just gave are also going to be in the PowerPoint, so you can reference back to them. And we're doing 2 rounds with the values cards. And so the first round, you may get it down to 8 or 12, or even maybe you can get it down to, 5 values. But then we'll do the exercise again, and I'll give you some harder questions to make sure that, again, you can get it down to 2 values. Oh, okay. So Caitlin got it as a link above. Okay, so now that you all have it pulled up, I gave you the high level instructions. In terms of using this PowerPoint, first I would go to File and actually export a copy, or I guess create a copy, download a copy. So File, Create, and then create a copy, and then it will ask you to download there. That's going to be the way to do it. So it'll open right in Microsoft PowerPoint. Okay, so once you get this downloaded as a PowerPoint, again, you'll see the instructions I just told you on slide 3. And then the easiest way I think for doing this is just to take this PowerPoint, make a new one, a brand new PowerPoint. And when you see a value card you think is most important to you, just copy and paste it into that new PowerPoint. If you have questions, feel free to send them to me privately in the chat, or to everyone is fine either way. I'm going to give you guys a solid like 7 to 10 minutes to work through this exercise, and then I will give you instructions for round 2 before you get started on that. So I'm going to go ahead and turn on some music now. All right, I've got about 10 people who are done now, so I'll go ahead and give instructions for round two. If you're still doing round one, you're good. You can continue that. We're gonna have more time here to work through round two anyway. So this is where in round two, the hard decisions happen, okay? And no matter how many times I've done this exercise, I always hear in this part, wow, this is not easy. And so if that's you in a minute, know that you are in very good company. You're going to ask yourself these questions to reduce your list of values to at most two or three. The reason why we want to reduce the list to as few as two or three is because, first of all, if we're going to use this in decision making, we need it to be something we can easily, first of all, memorize, to have ready to apply to a decision and as soon as we need to make one, right? Quickly be able to remember them and say, okay, how does this fit with my value of compassion, service, and family, whatever. And when you are also choosing your values, it is also easy to kind of be like, well, this is something that it's kind of, I want it to be more important. Again, that is not a top value. If we're looking at something that is so infectious that other people are almost inspired by it, right? Then they find things about you they want to emulate as a result. Then it is helpful for those values to be things that you can continually point to, and other people can say, wow, that person is really living out their values to the fullest. And even there's also people out there, if you're familiar with Brene Brown, she even thinks you should get it down to one value. I think that's a bit extreme. I think two or three is, you can definitely live those out, I think, fully on a daily basis. And again, that's what we want to be able to do and also apply it to be a litmus test in decision making. So here's some questions for you to think about to get this list down to two or three. First is, am I choosing this value because someone I love considers it important, but it's not actually the most important value to me? That is a common thing that we see when helping people choose their values. Then, secondly, simply, is this just something I wish I valued? Again, as I just mentioned, that is not a good reason for that to be your most important values. And lastly, or actually second to last, is this value left in my stack because I would feel bad if other people thought I didn't value this? In general, if we're starting with that question of wondering what other people would think, in general, that's not helpful. But specifically in this exercise, it is especially not helpful. We don't need to wonder what other people would think. We are trying to, again, just see what is most true about ourselves. We are looking at our life to tell us who we are, right? We're listening to our life tell us who we are, right? As Parker Palmer says. And so if there is something that you're trying to live up to, that's great. It's good to have goals, but here in our values, we're talking about what already is true in your life. And then lastly, and this one's hard, but true for a lot of people, including me, this is born true in my life too. But is this something I used to value, but perhaps no longer do? Okay, so as you're looking at your stack of how many ever it is, 5 or 15, go through this list of questions for each value and see if that helps you reduce the list. You also may find that one of your values, as you're thinking about it, actually sort of flows up into and is wrapped up in the definition of another value. In that case, that also could be a way that you get your list down a bit, is to notice when that's the case. So again, I'll give you guys about 10 minutes for this part of the exercise and put on the music. And if you have any questions, feel free to put them in the chat. And when you have completed your values exercise and got it down to two or three, you can, again, just write done in the chat, and that'll give me a sense where everyone is. All right. So as we wrap up here, in this part of the exercise, we're about to just do some individual reflection again with your pen and paper. You'll also get this PDF of the slides at the end of the session today, so that if you want to refer back to any of these questions and all the resources and everything, you're welcome to do that way. What we're going to do on your pen and paper is again make another chart. And on the left side, it should have the values. And if you still weren't quite done with the exercise, but you feel good about a couple of them, you can do this part of the exercise even just with those two that you picked, let's say, or one. But look at each value that you chose of the three and ask yourself, how was each value born? What stories from your adolescence demonstrate this value? So I'll give you a couple minutes for that first question. And it is possible that a value could come up later in life and it didn't appear really in childhood or adolescence. But look and see and reflect back and see if you notice them. Okay, next question. Let's go back to those reflections we were doing earlier before we did the values exercise. First, looking 6 days ago at last Saturday. How did these values show up or not in your choices last week? And then that second reflection, looking at your worldview, the things that shaped you, how do your beliefs relate to your values? So spend a little time seeing if you can draw any connections between the zooming in towards Saturday and the zooming out in your worldview and beliefs, and see if there's any connections between those and your values. Okay, and then we'll also do a few sharing out in the chat in this part of the session. So if in the chat you feel comfortable to share, share with us any connection you see between a value you chose and something related to your Saturday or your worldview. Any connections you notice that you'd be willing to share. All right, a couple people shared in the chat. Thanks, Chris and Diana. Uh, just one on health that they grew around unhealthy familiar family members and didn't want to follow their footsteps. Definitely can learn from others' mistakes, and that can tie into our values. That is not uncommon for there to be a story like that that shapes a value of ours. And then Diana shared about dependability. That looks like showing up for a commitment, even if you're not feeling at your best. Absolutely. People that value dependability, I feel like that anyone who puts that value down would probably relate to something along those lines. For sure. And then Chelsea shared about last weekend and seeing her value of friends. That as she's has probably proven out, I'm assuming, and many times before, that spending time with them always you always leave better than you came. That is a good indicator we have spent a day well, right? Michael shared about faith and going to a church event last weekend, and particularly as a whole family, and that seems like something that you maybe have felt was true in your childhood that worked and was fruitful in your life, and you've been able to continue that tradition. Again, very often we see the tie between what really resonated for us and meant a lot to us as a kid, and being able to continue those things as an adult definitely can have tie-ins to values. And another last example I'll read off, and then we can keep thinking together. Edwina shares about the value of fun, that people in her family took themselves too seriously. Laughing is good medicine, and enjoying the company of your favorite people is restorative. I love that. Yes, restorative is a great word. And I think really you're explaining there a really good articulation of what fun, why that value would rise to the top to you. And again, that story of something in our childhood, maybe that we want to be the opposite of. Again, those can often come out in our values. Yeah. Okay, some other thoughts as you guys keep thinking about the values you just chose, and then we'll do a couple more share outs in the chat. First is what you pick today as your values. They're not set in stone, set in stone. You may discover as you keep thinking about your values, maybe a value that you chose of, we just talked about the value of fun. Like maybe somebody thinks about has that value and thinks about it and they realize it's actually joy, or she used the word restorative there. But just keep thinking and make sure that the words that you chose, which by the way were given to you in this PowerPoint, that those are the words that actually best describe the value word and concept that you're talking about. It may be that there's a better word out there. So keep thinking about that to make sure that the word you believe is the best representation is the one that you have. And then just think about one value you chose today and a time when you believe you were living out this value. So we zoomed in and looked at Saturday, but think just in general. Maybe those big moments in your life, the times you were proudest of yourself. How do your values connect to those moments? So, if anyone wants to share in the chat a value and a time when you were really proud of yourself for living out that value. Right. So Laura shares anytime that she's traveling with friends to enjoy God's creation, in each other's companies, she's living out that value of adventure. And it's interesting because oftentimes when we define a value, like Laura did here, it almost sounds like you can hear the other values in the value description. And so that is another way we can, again, look more closely at what's important to us is to just look how we simply define it. Again, discarding what was on the card, but just writing it in our own words. Another thing I would really challenge you all to think of doing is to think of a close family member or friend that you can have this discussion with, that you can share out your values and how you define them, and you can also ask them, do you see these values fully lived out in my life? Do you think any of them are values that I'm really just aspiring to but aren't really lived out in my life? So you can ask them questions, but also just share with them. And you can also, by the way, use this PowerPoint and give it to them to do this exercise as well. So I'll share a couple more things. And if you're still writing something in the chat, feel free to keep doing that. And I'll share when you're done. Is that values, again, should help you choose between conflicting options. So, whatever decision you walked in here with today, hopefully you are able to now take your values. Again, maybe give it a few days, think about it a little bit more in a good, quiet space that you enjoy to think about this exercise a little bit more and what your values are. And once you feel like they are the right values, correctly named values, then look at the decision in front of you and see if they help you choose between conflicting options. So they should be able to help in that everyday decision making, big decisions, small decisions, but they also are just an indicator of whether your decisions and actions and behaviors are living up to the standards that you have for yourself and the standards that others expect of you. Essentially, when you look at your values, am I becoming the person I want to become? I really like this whole book, but this quote really applies to what we're talking about here today from Joseph Badaracco, and it's about bringing the art of reflection into your busy life. It's a short book that really builds on a lot of the concepts today. So if you want to keep thinking about what we talked about today, this is a good book for that. Diana also added in the chat another example of values is courtesy. So, this is a good value, actually, courtesy of anytime I see two people with courtesy, I know it's going to look very, very different on how they describe it. Respect is another one of those values that often looks really different. But courtesy for her is when she mentors young children. She sees that thought of the relationship is fostered and built between us and others when using this concept, this way of living out her life of courtesy. And I want to give you guys an opportunity here briefly to ask questions. You can ask them out loud, turn on your volume and ask, or you can put it in the chat. But these are just some resources that I would give you guys to keep thinking on today's topics. So Let Your Life Speak, the book I referenced from Parker Palmer earlier, is awesome. This YouTube video, if you're a video person, Angela Duckworth connects the idea of what you're trying to do in life with who you are. The Road to Character by David Brooks. How Good People Make Tough Choices by Rushworth Kidder. And if you're more of a biography type person rather than just a straight nonprofit, Leadership in Turbulent Times, or sorry, nonfiction. Leadership in Turbulent Times by Doris Kearns Goodwin is really good. It's an analysis of 4 presidents and how they figured out how to live with character in turbulent times, which of course we're always in. And then the last thing that I wanted to just share with you all before we jump into Q&A is that again, this exercise is not meant to be just a thing that you do once and then you know your values. You should be able to come back and look at this exercise maybe every 3 years or so and ask yourself if your values have changed. So if you've never done this exercise, then bookmark this. Maybe set a reminder for yourself 3 falls from now to try this again and see if anything's changed, or 5 years, whatever it may be. But just notice as you go along in the next few days, and as you make these tiny little decisions even in your day, how are these values you chose being lived out? And are these the right words that I've chosen? Okay, with that, I will open it up for Q&A. Thanks for everyone for being all in today, ready to engage in a topic with such deep self-reflection. It was a pleasure to work with you all, and I'll open it now up for Q&A. You're welcome to drop them in the chat or out loud.